I think there's strong evidence, and I think the strongest case against any Adelson is against Charlie Adelson. That's their best opportunity. And if prosecutors argue it the way I want them to argue it, I think they can convict Charlie Adelson. Absolutely.
Welcome to a special edition of Surviving the Survivor. The Dan Markel murder with Karm on crime.
So, Karm, I'm a little out of breath, and that's because I had to corral you like cattle to get here. The good thing about having a big-time guest like Vinnie Politan, who's no joke, he is the main court TV anchor from, I think, the great state of New Jersey. He was a county prosecutor in New Jersey, went to a little school called Stanford. He's a bright guy, and he's been covering every major court case in the United States as far as I can remember, and I'm no spring chicken myself. I'm 53. Karm, admit right now, have you ever heard of Vinnie Politan prior to 30 seconds ago?
No, I haven't, and you don't have to apologize for the insult before that. You have to corral me in.
You're excused because you're 83 years old. Vinnie, how are you? Thank you so much for joining us.
I'm doing great. How you doing, Mom?
I'm doing great. My name is Carmela.
Yeah, you know what? Carmela was my great-grandmother's name.
You see?
Italians, Jews.
All in the family.
And my Aunt Carmela down in Monmouth County makes the best meatballs in the world.
That's happy news. That's good. I make the second best.
She makes matzo balls. Your grandmother or aunt makes meatballs. Those are Adam Sandler's Bulldogs' names. They were Meatball and Matzo Ball. Karm, I'm worried about this mic. It's a little high on you, so we're going to lower it. There we go. Beautiful.
Okay.
By the way, Vinnie, before we get cracking on the Dan Markel murder, what do you think about the fact that I host a podcast with my 83-year-old mom? Have you done one of these before?
It's amazing. I think it's amazing. It gives us a really true perspective of everything. You know what I mean? 83 years, you see a lot, you know a lot, and I think she'll bring a lot.
Well, so I'm a former Fox News national correspondent, and I had left the industry because I've got 3 little kids, started my own company, and during the pandemic, I had nothing going on. And I said, you know what? I've got a woman with a lot of wisdom here. So we started the podcast. We've gotten great reception, and currently writing a book.
And great guests.
And
we are getting
guest,
into
thanks
the
to
subject.
The great Steve Cohen. And so here we go. So your time is limited. You've covered every imaginable case. I mean, we're talking Jodi Arias, that just pops into my head, Trayvon Martin, this, that, every other case, OJ. How does the Dan Markel case rank among the elite court cases, and why do you think there is so much attention on this?
There's a lot of attention because of one, the situation. Okay, he's an esteemed law professor, right? And he gets whacked, like someone puts a hit out on him. That's outrageous. But then when you start getting into the relationships and the alleged motive behind all of it, it becomes an intriguing story. And I think from my perspective, why I latched onto this story was when we first came across it, I was like, okay, so they're trying the bottle girl and they're trying her boyfriend or former boyfriend, father of her children, but we're not trying the people who ordered the hit? What is going on in Tallahassee? I did not understand that. And to me, it was outrageous. Now, I don't know if this is methodical, that the prosecutors are taking one piece at a time, but I'm a former prosecutor. A case like this, the person you need to get is the person at the top of the chain, the one who said, I want Dan Markel dead. Okay? To me, that is the most culpable person, more culpable than the person that squeezes the trigger. And they weren't doing it, and I didn't understand why. And now that we're at the point where at least one person with the last name Adelson has been charged, I can exhale a little bit. But I think there was an outrage factor to this story that elevated it.
And I think that outrage still exists. So, I mean, it goes without saying that you think the wheels of justice, I assume, moved too slowly, because obviously the Dan Markel hit happened back in 2014. It's now 2022 for those keeping count. And Charlie Adelson was just arrested back in April. So first and most obvious question, Charlie, does he get convicted? And prior to getting convicted, if you believe he will, does he flip or not?
Well, this is a fascinating part of all this, right? Because Charlie Adelson, you know, and the feeling I got from him is that like he was playing the role of kind of like the tough guy, the hot shot, right? He's got the convertible, fancy car, and all of that, and like felt like he was in control of everything. And now he's at a point now where he is facing the rest of his life, and he's got a bunch of years left of being locked up. I mean, what a drastic change in circumstance. I just don't know what's in his head right now. Does he in his head believe that, hey, I can beat this? I look at this case and I believe it's very winnable for prosecutors. I never know what 12 people in a room will do. I learned that lesson in Orange County, Florida. There was a case involving a young single mother who lied for 31 days about her child being missing. The whole world thought her mother was guilty, but the whole world didn't matter. Only the 12 people in the jury, and they sent her home. So I never predict the outcome of the case. I just evaluate the strength of the case. And can anyone explain to me and give me a reasonable, remember it's reasonable doubt, a reasonable explanation for why Dan Markel was murdered by these guys from South Florida? Like, what motive would they have? What reasonable explanation other than being hired by the Adelsons would they have to take out this law professor in Tallahassee? I cannot think of one reasonable explanation. And that's what I would argue to this jury as a prosecutor is that, hey, doubt is doubt, but it's got to be reasonable doubt. So you, ladies and gentlemen, the jury, what is the reasonable explanation? And you heard Luis Rivera come in court today and say what he did. What reasonable explanation would he have for killing this law professor in Tallahassee other than being hired by the only people on earth who had a motive, not a reason to kill someone, but a motive, right? To kill this law professor, and it's someone with the last name Adelson. So I think that is the strength of the case. You've got to keep it big. Don't get bogged down in what exactly did he say in that undercover recording. It's about the huge circumstance. It's a circumstantial case, but there's one huge circumstance. These two guys, Sigfredo and Luis, have no reason in the world to kill Dan Markel other than being hired to do it.
And we're going to get to the other Adelsons in a second, but the lovely woman to my right and your guys left, my mother, Carmela, from day one has said that Harvey Adelson is involved because we have her husband, my father, who is the yin to Carmela's yang. He's soft, quiet-spoken. Carmela has not gone a day in 61 years of marriage where she's not yelled at my father. And that is the Donna Adelson dynamic of the family. But from day one, Karm, right, you've said that Harvey, what do you think of Harvey, Karm? And by the way, before you say what you think of Harvey, what do you think of Vinnie? No. I know you love Vinnie.
I already love Vinnie, but that's beside it.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think what we did, which was kind of warped, but I just want to tell you what Joel and I did. There are many similarities between the Adelson family and the Waldman family because they have the domineering mother. Voila, c'est moi. This is the domineering mother. And she has this son, that she's like very, very close to and has this real sick relationship. That's us.
That would be me.
That would be you. And we have a lot of similar, and I have a husband that I adore and love, and he knows it's a real love story of 61 years. And he's a very quiet American from New York, So there are some and I have a daughter who is like their oldest son, She's sort of in New Jersey and doing her own thing. So there were some similarities, even in the way we relate to each other. But I said it's like a story, us like them without the murder.
But that's why you think that Harvey is complicit.
And I think there is no way in hell that Harvey didn't know what Donna was doing, because they are pretty close and they are in the same apartment and so on and so forth. But the big question that nobody dares to approach, and I would like to ask you what you think about Wendy.
Well, so, I mean, she's in the middle of it all, right? I mean, Wendy, it's her husband, it's her children, it's her children's lives that are at stake here. The testimony of her at the trials, bizarre affect and demeanor on that stand. I didn't understand it. I can't imagine that if you were alleging this plot, that the whole family has a piece of it and kind of knows what's going on here. Now, for a prosecutor, you've got to create that direct connection, right? So the direct connection, obviously, is Catherine McBanoa, who's in the middle, and she's in the middle of Sigfredo and Charlie. So from a prosecutor's perspective, I believe that's the stronger case, because you've got that direct link, because this whole case is about relationships, right? It's all about relationships. And the McBanoa Charlie relationship is there. It exists. You can't deny it. There's no way around it, right? So I think that's the connection. I think the only thing that could happen here that could save Charlie is if Donna or Harvey stepped forward, and you've got to tell me if you think it's within them, would step forward at his trial and say, "It was me." I don't know. I'm doing an accent. I'm sorry. "It was me. I did it. I did it. Charlie had nothing to do with it. I spoke with Catherine. I gave her the money. Charlie had nothing." The only one who can save Charlie are his parents, but they've got to fall on the sword to do it. And I don't know what those dynamics are like. Would a parent like that, a domineering mother, fall on the sword for her son and have to admit to being a murderer and sacrifice the rest of her life behind bars in an attempt, and it's not a guarantee because they could still convict him, but in an attempt to save her son?
Vinny, let me ask you. First, Karm, would you do that? I have a lot of questions. Hang on one sec. Vinny, from a legal standpoint, the scenario you just played out, if there's a court proceeding and Donna Adelson literally stood up in the middle of the proceeding and said, "I did it, I paid McBanoa," does that have a legal precedent in a courtroom if she literally stood up and said that? And would that immediately exonerate Charlie? That doesn't work like that, right? No. What that would do, that would cause a mistrial, probably, if the jury's in the room. That's a mistrial for the case against Charlie, and then the next day, she gets indicted, okay? The next day she gets indicted, because that will be recorded by court TV cameras, that confession. The scenario I'm describing is the defense calls her as a witness. The defense puts her on the stand, and she falls on the sword on the stand in front of the jury, at the point where, prosecutors are not in control of the situation. They can't control what she's going to say and how she's going to say it. That's what I'm describing. Karm, would you fall on the sword for me?
I always say I love you so much I could die for you, but I'm not sure that I would go to jail for you.
Seriously, if you knew I was going away for the rest of my life.
Can I just think about it till 5 o'clock and give you the answer?
Yeah, it's fine. So there's so many places to go here. I want to, next week, Vinny, we've got Steve Epstein, who wrote a book called Extreme Punishment, and he's coming on the show. Here's a little chapter.
He wrote on the case.
He wrote on the case, and he took a lot of heat. He went on a podcast because he basically said that he does not see any evidence, any tangible evidence that links Wendy to the case. And a lot of people following this said, "What are you talking about? She's guilty as sin." And we're going to have him on next week, and he can make his case. But in the chapter in the book here, a little vignette from the book is when Wendy is being interrogated by Isom, the investigator, and she's told that Dan was shot and killed. Wendy asked to call her mom, and she says, this is from the book, from Extreme Punishment, says, "Hi, Mom, how's it going?" Wendy said once the call connected, her voice calm, surprisingly unemotional. "Good," her mother replied, proceeding to make small talk with her only daughter. "Mom," Wendy says, "I need you to sit down. I'm fine. The boys are fine." Donna says, "Can I put you on speaker?" wanting her husband, Harvey, to be able to hear the conversation. Wendy told her that was fine, and Donna says, "Okay, what's the matter?" She says, "Danny's been shot." What? Donna explained, and I don't think he's going to make it. And it goes on and on. But, I mean, assuming that they had a role in this hit, I mean, this is really like sociopathic and psychopathic behavior here, right? Especially on Wendy's part.
Yeah, but the whole thing is, in what world do we think children are better off with a murdered father? Okay, because that's part of the computation. You're talking about the mindset of accused murderers. Okay, so somehow in their mind, if you believe they set up this hit, and I can't come up with another reasonable explanation as to why Dan was shot and killed by these two guys, but someone in their mind had to believe that these children would have a better life with a murdered father. I don't understand that.
Well, when I compare the Waldmans to the Adelsons, I have to say that we are crazy, but we are not psychotic. And as much, I think they went outside of the norms for just neurotic. They were psychotic. I think Donna was definitely, she's not normal, and Wendy, according to
Vinny, by the way, my mother is a licensed therapist.
Wendy, who is in this book that I just read by
Extreme Punishment, she's described as a little bit meek. She doesn't like to confront people. She calls her mother to confront people. So the vicious, the Rottweiler is really Donna. I've never done cocaine in my life, Carmela, but I feel like I'm on it because Vinny has limited time and I'm trying to race through stuff. So a couple things I want to get to. Just on the record for you, Vinny, not to put pressure on you, write down the list. Charlie, do you think he gets convicted?
I think there's strong evidence, and I think the strongest case against any Adelson is against Charlie Adelson. That's their best opportunity. And if prosecutors argue it the way I want them to argue it, I think they can convict Charlie Adelson. Absolutely.
And then I'm not going to put you on the spot about convictions, but an indictment. Does Donna get indicted?
Yes. I think once you get one Adelson, you've got to go after all of them. There's enough now to indict all of them. There absolutely is. Whether or not you win the trial or not, as a prosecutor, your ethical obligation is to go after people you believe have committed the crime, but you also have to believe you can convict them at trial, that there's enough evidence to convict them. And I believe there absolutely is. I absolutely believe there is because of the financial...
You believe there is for Wendy and Harvey as well. You believe there's enough to indict them.
Again, Wendy, I think, is the toughest one, right? Because she's not running the family business where the money is flowing from, that Catherine McManua is coming from. But you can connect her to her family through all of those relations. And I think you have to. I just think you have to do it. Ethically, as a prosecutor, you're sitting in a courtroom and you're arguing that this is a murder for hire case, and you've done it a couple times already. You've made those arguments. You've got to bring in the people that you believe are at the top of the chain, because you can't just go after the people who are poor. You can't just go after the people who can't afford the best attorneys in the world. You've got to go after all of them.
And then, to throw a curveball and increase the pressure, who's the next one to drop out of Donna, Harvey, and Wendy in terms of an indictment? I think it may be Harvey. I think it absolutely may be Harvey. I mean, you've got the conversation with Charlie and Harvey. I think that is significant. And he's running the business. It's his business. So I think he would be next in line, and that would put pressure on him. That would put pressure on Donna as well. Vinny, eventually I'm going to train Carmelo to not say while you're speaking or another guest is speaking that she has one question.
Well,
but she says she has one question.
No, but I am very aware that he has an important meeting and I would like to ask this question.
But this is an audio medium.
Here is a question.
So when you ask if you have a question or you have a
Don't-
question,
you-
they hear
don't
it. But go
lecture.
on. Go ahead, Karm.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So
Karm.
the question I would like to ask before they have to go is, why didn't Katie Magbanua or Garcia, why are they sitting for life when they could have pleaded?
And flipped.
Yeah. This is fascinating. And I thought the best opportunity that Magbanua had, Katie, was if Sigfredo came into the courtroom and said, I spoke directly with Charlie. Catherine had nothing to do with it, because that's what her defense was. That would have been reasonable doubt. That would have marched her out of the courtroom, and Sigfredo's children could have been raised by their mother if Sigfredo had done that. But maybe it's not the truth, number one, and number two, maybe he's just doesn't have that type of character. I mean, you're judging the character of a hitman, so how far can you trust him anyway? Magbanua, I think, held on to the hopes that she did well in the first trial, right? The jury didn't convict her. She felt like she could win. She rolled the dice and she lost. As soon as she took the stand, though, and started saying, I had nothing to do with it, I know nothing about it, she became useless to prosecutors, because now there is sworn testimony in court of her saying, I did not put this thing together with Charlie and Sigfredo. So with her in court saying that under sworn testimony, she can no longer be a witness for the prosecution. She's dirty now. Like if I try to get her to flip now and say, oh yeah, Charlie had everything, well, then the only thing that happens at Charlie's trial is all her prior statements saying he had nothing to do with it, I had nothing to do with it, come in, and her credibility is zero. Plus, ethically, I would not make a deal with her as a prosecutor now that she has testified in court under oath that she had nothing to do with it, she was innocent, and she didn't set it up. So the thing that surprised me, I really thought the curveball may have been Sigfredo getting into court, having already been convicted, and testifying on behalf of Catherine to exonerate her from this hit and inculpate Charlie Adelson, but he didn't do it. So she's gone now too.
Why?
Why didn't he do it? Because he has no character. He's not a real man. If he's a real man and you want to take care of your kids are best off with both parents, but when one of your parents is a hitman, your children are probably better off with one parent, which is Catherine Magbanua, but now those kids have no parents. They're both locked up, and who knows how those kids are going to end up. Because ultimately, this whole case is about children, isn't it? It's about taking care of children. And it comes back to what I said just a few minutes ago. What person in their right mind believes a child is better off with a murdered father? Knowing everything we know about children and the trauma that all of that will play on them for the rest of their lives. Whoever ordered that hit is sick, should not be free, should be locked up, and should not have contact with any of those children.
Amen. And there are something like 10 kids affected by this, and they are the real victims in all this. A lot of people speculate that Katie didn't rat or didn't say anything because that the Adelsons are potentially bankrolling her children. But you don't think, if that was you, Vinny, is that reason enough to not say anything because the Adelsons are bankrolling your kids, so you're just going to sit in prison and not be a parent?
Yeah, I don't understand that thinking. Here's there's a couple parts to it, right? Like, she thought she could have won, and maybe there's some alleged pot of gold at the end of the rainbow for her. But that rainbow is gone. It is gone. It's not going to work out for her. But I could see someone being motivated by that, because that was the initial motivation for everything, right? It was all about money. It was all about money for Magbanua, Garcia, and Rivera. So maybe there was something like that. But if there was any transfer of money or anything, I don't know how they could do it at this point, because the spotlight is on any and all of these bank transactions and everything else. I don't know how they could pull it off at this point. So I don't know why. But I do know her and her attorneys were adamant that she had nothing to do with it, that it was Charlie making a deal with Sigfredo, that he would stop, dating McBanoa if he did this for her. I just find that whole thing ridiculous.
Vinny, I know you got to go in a sec. One last thing. So yesterday we had 3 ex-cons who served something like 90 years between them on the show to get their reaction to Charlie being held in jail and what could be going on in his mind. And they kind of all came together and said that these guys, basically came from the streets. These 3 ex-cons, great guys now, turned their lives around. They said, look, Charlie's not made from the same cloth as us. He's pampered. He was brought up upper middle class. He was a dentist. They said they have no doubt in their mind that Charlie is going to feel that pressure, that he's sitting in solitary in that jail right now, and that he's going to flip. Any thoughts on their reaction to him flipping?
Him flipping on his mother and father and sister. Wow. I think,
they said he's not man enough. That's what they said.
Not man enough to
take the heat and to go to prison. He's
right,
not
that he
live
would
by the street code. And they think if it might not be his parents, but he might flip on Wendy. They said they just think he's going to start to crack in there.
I don't know him well enough. On the outside, the perception I got of him that he would play the tough guy on the outside, probably watched one too many episodes of The Sopranos, right? The type, and thought he could live that life. And then reality sets in when he's locked up behind bars. Can he use his money? Can he become sort of a jailhouse lawyer because he's bright and educated to survive inside? Or is he looking at, all right, I need to do whatever I can to get out of here, whether it's in 10 years or 20 years, I gotta do something. He might, I don't know the family dynamics well enough. You guys, I think, would have better insight into that particular question.
Thank you.
You're living the life minus the murder.
No, but
trust me, I thought about it.
Can I share my last minute thought about what's happening with this story? One of the reasons, and maybe I'm idealizing, but culturally, this is so out of the norm.
For a nice Jewish boy.
To kill the father of your children. It's just not done. You can bitch and moan and hire lawyers and fight in court and do all sorts of nasty things and spit in their soup or whatever, but you will not do this type of thing. This is not the normal Jewish middle class behavior,
Karm,
upper middle class.
I'm so glad you brought that up because that was going to be my final question to Vinny, actually. And you gave me an
all right, just go do
alley-oop.
it.
You know what an alley-oop is? It's when you toss the ball up and the other guy dunks it. So, Vinny, you've covered all these cases, man, and it's like a car chase. Like you're always going to get caught. 9.9% of the time, you're going to get caught. The Adelsons are caught. What are people thinking? Is it greed? Is it sociopathy? Is it narcissism? What is the fundamental thread that ties all these crazies together?
Well, in this particular case, what I will say, and I say this a lot, I worked in a courthouse, right? And I worked in a criminal courthouse. So I would go into criminal courtrooms each and every day. But they were not the most dangerous courtrooms in the courthouse. The most dangerous, family court, where people are fighting. It's about emotions. It's always about emotion because it's about the breakup of a husband and wife. It's about custody of children. And that's when people lose all sense of anything. The judges who are always in the most danger are the judges making decisions in those cases, not criminal cases. Let me give you a quick example because criminals just see the world a little bit differently. I prosecuted someone who was a real low-level case. It was a convicted felon who had possession of a gun, right? So I got him convicted, but he wasn't sent away. He was coming back for sentencing. So after he was just convicted in court by me and will now be going back to jail at some point, the trial's over. So I got to go back to my office. I go in the elevator. The door's just about to close. Who jumps in but the defendant? And I'm like, oh my God. It's just the two of us. And he turns to me and he says, nice job, counselor. And I was like, he gets it, right? He's a criminal. I'm a prosecutor. We're just doing our jobs. But if that was in family court and I was the lawyer on the other side and the husband who just lost custody of his kids and has to pay more money, he was in the elevator with me, I would have been in danger. That's the difference. And that's what happened in this case, I believe.
And that is why Vinnie Politan is at the top of his game. Karm, that's what I envy and also emulate in life. Being at the top of your game. Vinnie Politan, when it comes to court cases, there is no one better. There's no one bigger. Vinnie, thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. Two things. Promise me you'll come back. Is that a yes?
Absolutely. But
Awesome.
only if Carmel is here.
100%. That's what everyone says.
Thanks, Vinnie.
And,
Mutual.
And the second thing is there something we can plug? Do you have a book? Do you have, a race car?
Court TV. You can
Yeah,
plug
you watch my show. My show's on every night at 8 o'clock on Court TV.
Go Court TV. We will watch.
I will watch it now.
100%. You have a new viewer. Vinnie, thank you so much. All the best. We're going to have John Singer, Wall Street attorney, one of the smartest men alive, coming up next, along with Judy Tseng of an Asian American Legal Focus. We'll be right back.
Welcome back.
So, Karm, as I said, with Vinnie, I've never done cocaine, but I feel like I just did cocaine and then ran the New York Marathon because Vinnie was supposed to come on, didn't come on, it came on last minute. Love the guy. He was awesome. What did you think of Vinnie? You admitted you had never heard of him to his face, but now you have heard of him. What did you think?
Well, I tell you something. I don't misunderstand. It's completely platonic grandmotherly thing, but I am in love with people like this, like Vinnie.
He's very like Winnie. She has a tough time with her V's, Karm, but Vinnie is good too. But he was number one, he's super smart, and number two,
he's super warm,
very warm, and number three, very high energy. So he like amped us up. But now to break down some of what Vinnie said, we've got the always level-headed John Singer, the silent assassin, as I call him.
The yin to the yang.
The yin to the yang. John, how are you? I know, and by the way, John is doing this. I shouldn't even ask, but I'll tell you, he's got COVID right now. But John, how are you feeling?
I'm doing great, thank you.
Okay, great. And that's the best part about Zoom is you can't breathe on us. Judy from Asian American Legal Focus joins us as well. Judy, how's life since we last talked?
Oh, it's going great. Yep. Doing just fine.
Excellent. So, as I said, we just had Vinnie Politan on. The main Court TV anchor has a show every night. I believe it is
8 o'clock.
8 o'clock on Court TV. And he said some interesting things. Number one, he was kind of surprised by how slowly the wheels of justice have moved on this case. And he said
in Florida.
He says, obviously, the murder of Dan Markel was back in 2014, and just now in 2022, Charlie was arrested. He's worked up because he says, look, it's easy to prosecute the poor people, as he put it, the lower societal people, the hitmen. But he said, now it's time to exact justice. And he went on the record and said that he doesn't know if Charlie will get convicted. He says there's overwhelming evidence for that. But he does believe that the other three are 100% involved. And he says that he expects indictments in the following order: Harvey, in light of the Matsuri tapes, which we can get into, then Donna, and he says Wendy is the hardest to indict and prosecute, but he thinks it will likely happen. So without further ado, John, what do you think about Vinnie's take on all that?
Interesting. I don't agree with him on the order. I think that the order, from my standpoint, is going to be Donna next, and then Wendy and Harvey. It's a tough one. I think a lot of people change their minds vis-a-vis Harvey after listening to the Matsuri conversation. So we certainly know that as of the bump, or 2 days after the bump on April 21st of 16, Harvey was in on whatever was going on. Whether or not he was in on the planning, that's a different story. But by the time they may get to him, he's going to be maybe early, mid-80s, and he's already approaching 80. So he's not next. I mean, Donna is the natural next person. I think they're waiting to see if Charlie flips on Donna. I think they waited to see if Katie would flip on Charlie. That's been their MO from the very beginning, which dovetails into Vinny's comment about the pace of the arrests. So I think they're going to wait to see if Charlie flips. And I don't think he will, but I do believe Donna will be next and then Wendy.
Karm, maybe they'll just put Harvey into Miami Jewish with my father and your husband. How about you? How about
it's a
you?
nursing home. It's called Miami Jewish Health, and it's like Miami Jewish Hell.
It's
hell.
Maybe they'll sponsor us. It's close to it's close enough to prison. Judy, your thoughts. So he says Charlie, he thinks there's overwhelming evidence. It's going to go Harvey, Donna, and Wendy, and he made it a point to say Wendy is the most difficult. He wasn't 100% sure, but he thinks that she will be indicted eventually. Your thoughts?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I totally agree with John. So just, I would just basically be repeating what John said, because there's just like a lot more evidence that we know of so far against Donna. She was the one that wrote those checks from the Adelson Institute to Katie McBanua. And, she said on the wiretap, it's about you and me. After the bump to Charlie, there's a lot of phone calls between her and Charlie. So I think it's most likely going to be Donna next. And also I agree that Harvey is going to be the one who's hardest to get charges against because of the fact that, there doesn't seem to be as much good evidence about his involvement.
So about Harvey, and this is something we didn't really get into depth with Vinny, the Matsuri tapes, John. Why do you think Georgia played them? It appeared that there was enough evidence against Charlie. Why play those tapes at the preliminary hearing? What kind of legal strategy was that?
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, we had not heard, or I had not heard those tapes previously. There was some reference, I think, to one of your prior guests who said that tape had been out there previously, that had been released under the Sunshine Laws. I had never heard it before. But I think one thing about Harvey, which is interesting, it's like so much else in this case. Things point in different directions. So on the one hand, Donna, as Judy said, after the bump, said to Charlie, this pertains to the two of us. She didn't say it pertains to the three of us or the four of us. Donna said that the piece of paper she received from purportedly Rivera's brother pertained to the two of us. So that leads one to believe that Harvey was in the dark. But then you hear the Matsuri tapes, so that at least as of the bump or around the bump, he was certainly in on what had occurred. And then I just had read Ruth Markel's excellent book, The Unveiling. And in that book, she had described some very peculiar behavior on Harvey's behalf. I believe it was at the Shiva. Apparently, after the memorial in Tallahassee on Sunday, July 20th, the folks went back to Wendy's house where she was living at the time, the rented house. And apparently, whenever Ruth tried to talk to her, Harvey was hovering very much, I wouldn't say in a guilty way, but very much in a suspicious way. I had never heard that before either. So when I read Ruth's book, that was another thing that, oh, wait a minute, Harvey may very well have been more involved than we were led to believe.
And Karm has been saying that from day one.
because they have been very, very close. Him and Donna were like, now that I read the first 200 pages of
Extreme Punishment.
Steve
Epstein's book.
It didn't come out.
By the way, he's our guest next week.
It didn't come out yet, but we read the galleys, and I read the first 200 pages, and it says that they were Donna and Harvey were truly from very young age in Brooklyn. They were like sweethearts, and they really had a love marriage. It wasn't just a marriage of,
Convenience.
it's time to get married and let's find the first guy who is going to be a dentist or something like that. They really had a close relationship, and they were doing things together. I mean, she even quit her teaching job to be his office manager.
Yeah, probably because she didn't want to work like my wife. I love you, Eliana.
I want to tell you something about the Epstein book. I know it's a legal case, and I know John and Judy are the two lawyers here. But the Epstein book, even though Epstein is a lawyer also, the first 200 pages is all the growing up of Dan Markel and of Wendy Adelson and their backgrounds and what they picked up from life. And one of the interesting things to me is that Dana was really not a fighter. Not Dana. Wendy was not a fighter. Dan was a very, very
aggressive
fighter.
He got very aggressive during the divorce
proceedings. Very, very, very aggressive. And Wendy just didn't know how to fight as well as he did. And she used her mother as her, like her attack dog, so to speak. And the mother just loved that role. I mean, that's in the book. I don't know if it's fiction or if it's fancy fiction.
Shout out to Fancy. But Karm, that's an interesting point. But I want to get Judy's take as well on these Matsuri tapes. And by the way, before I get into that, real quickly, if you want our newsletter, I always forget to say this, and people bug me behind the scenes, drop your email into the YouTube comment section. We're also on Instagram at Surviving the Survivor. You better follow us there. And also on Facebook at Surviving the Survivor. Judy, to you, same thing. I mean, why would Georgia, if there seems to be overwhelming evidence against Charlie, why present the Matsuri tapes at that preliminary hearing? What do you think the legal strategy is there?
I think it was probably to basically imply that they had a lot more dirt on Harvey and the whole family in general. So perhaps it was to psychologically intimidate Charlie, because Charlie probably didn't know they had this information. I'm not sure. I mean, it is true that the Matsuri tapes have been on Deep Dive True Crime for the last couple of years, but I definitely did not know what was being said. And even when you listen to that old video from a couple of years ago, there's just so much background noise, and it's a very long recording that, any normal person would have already just turned off and be like, what is this? A bunch of banging noises from a restaurant, so it's not until recently that the actual contents of the video that are so important have been revealed to the public.
And John, I sent you something. This is on public record on Fancy's YouTube page, but essentially Wendy's attorney commented on some stuff that Fancy had posted about I believe it was the Matsuri tapes. Can you explain that and what your take on all that was? Because that was a little odd.
Yeah, I mean, I saw that colloquy between John Lauro and Fancy regarding the admissibility of the tapes, and John Lauro was claiming that the tapes should have been stopped at points of personal discussion, and henceforth they may be inadmissible. But the larger question is, why is John Lauro writing to Fancy Fiction? His client, and this was only 2 months ago, this is certainly after Charlie has already been indicted. This was after Wendy's name has now been more and more bandied about as a co-conspirator. This was at a time, and is at a time, when Wendy is still certainly susceptible to prosecution. So to what end is John Lauro writing to Fancy Fiction? It may just be that he wanted to pick a fight or couldn't help himself, but it just seems odd to me that he's engaging in that sort of a dialogue. And just to pick up on one thing that Karm said about the Epstein book, which I've read the book and I think it's excellent, tells a very clear, concise story. I think with Dan and Wendy, what I've gleaned from mutual friends and the like is that Dan was a very provocative guy. And liked to engage in intellectual discourse and was certainly a very charming and warm guy, but he enjoyed sparring with people. Wendy, that was not her thing. But in the divorce, if you think about it, Dan had so much ammunition in the divorce and Wendy didn't. When divorces occur in states like Florida, it's very formulaic vis-a-vis the money distribution. There's not a lot of wiggle room for how the money gets distributed. But the big issue was the kids. And Dan had such a better argument on keeping the kids in Tallahassee. There were so many compelling grounds as to why relocation should have been denied. It was denied. So Dan had and he was fighting for his kids. I mean, she wanted to take those kids to South Florida. So he was going to be as belligerent as can be in his papers. And there was also a raw emotion on his part. It wasn't at his behest. This divorce was of her volition. She wanted the divorce. He did not. So he was going to use legal means to sort of exact some of those raw emotions against her.
And to that point, Judy and Karm, we'll get back to you in just one second. Vinny brought up something interesting, which I've heard, and I'm no attorney, but he was a county prosecutor in New Jersey, the great state of New Jersey, where Karm raised me, and said that the most dangerous courtroom is not the criminal courtroom, but the family court. Judy, why is that? Just because emotions are so raw in a family court?
Yes, it's also the emotions, the fact that a lot of times people are fighting over children, just as in the Markel Adelson case. And plus, the family law judges have a lot of discretion in making their decisions. So a lot of the cases don't wind up being appealed because the attorneys all know it's within the judge's discretion. So, getting back to what John was saying, I feel that Dan Markel's arguments were totally legally valid. He totally had the law on his side in regards to the relocation of the kids. And any parent who faces possibly having their kids taken away from them would have done the same. So I don't fault him for being a totally zealous advocate for himself.
But I didn't study Latin when I was in high school, but I know the saying that the mortibus nihil quod no bene. Of the dead people, never say anything that is not good, only say the good stuff. So Dan Markel, we always make him into Mother Teresa. But when it even says in the what is the book,
Steve Epstein,
Extreme
Punishment. Because of you, Steve Epstein's getting 4,000 plugs in this show. He should thank you for your.
No, because I was impressed by the psychological description of the characters, and Dan Markel. It almost like it became his obsession in a way. They say, how hard he worked in the department at Florida State University, and when this happened, this separation and divorce and the children's issue, that he focused all his energy on that, and he even neglected in a certain way the faculty assignments that he had, or the faculty, the professional aspect of his life was so focused on these children and what was going on there. And allegedly, both of them had to go to psychologists and psychiatrists. Both of them were getting physically sick from this stress. So it was a very, very, very high stress time in their life.
And I think to your point, Karm, the emotions were bubbling over, and like you said, Wendy wasn't a very good defensive player or offensive player.
Offensive player.
And so Donna jumped
and Donna
in.
is a very good offensive player.
Correct. To use a basketball analogy, John Singer, former.
Karm, what you said a second ago about the Latin phraseology and not speaking ill of the dead. The one person who definitely does not subscribe to that is Wendy Adelson, because the shots she would take at Dan from the witness stand. I mean, she couldn't help herself. I mean, in both trials, when she testified, they asked her if Dan was a great father. She couldn't say that. She said very good father. Like, she would take these little subtle shots at him throughout her testimony. So
yeah, but I think her style is more passive aggressive, that's a style I don't like. She's not confrontational. She just will do these little underhanded things.
Yes.
Yeah. In the book, it says Dan would go nuts because he was very reactive and verbal, and she would just give him the silent treatment and just leave, and he wouldn't know what was going on, and that was really difficult.
He wanted
for
her
him
to debate it.
Yeah.
But you know what will happen with the people who watch our channels will be enraged that I even dared to say something less than totally positive about Dan and totally negative about Wendy. And being a therapist, in the past, I always thought, if there is a problem, both parties are not perfect. Nobody's perfect, but both parties were not perfect. I don't know, I'm hung up on this psychological explanation of what was the genesis of this horrible tragedy. What precipitated the later events, and I don't know if you agree with this, that this was very, very
Karm, it's better that you're saying it, because I can just say, my mother's 83.
She's getting senile now.
I would never say it. John Singer would never say it. But I hear your point. And look, there is a reality to all of this, and no marriages are perfect. And obviously they were having issues. And he has a guy went to Harvard, and Harvard Law is a very bright guy. And when you're smart, you have a tendency sometimes to argue. And he was definitely argumentative with her, but that doesn't equate to.
And she's not, by any stretch of the imagination, she wasn't a saint or a sweet person.
But any which way you
slice it.
She
used a different approach. She used the
any
different
which way
ammunition.
You slice it, because I know Dan Markel personalities, and those people don't deserve to be killed. So
of course, my God.
Yeah. Now,
we would all be dead then.
I have a sort of a novice legal question for you. And Judy, I'll throw this one at you. So we found out there's something like 57,000 documents involved in this case, and potentially 6,000 surveillance videos. We were just talking about the Matsuri tapes, and you said, well, maybe they, introduced that at the preliminary hearing to make Charlie nervous. My question to you is, when does Charlie's legal team, when does that all enter into discovery, all of this stuff? Do they have access to all of those materials now, and what is the state's obligation to give it to the defense?
Oh, well, disclaimer is that I don't actually practice criminal law, but
you play one on TV, though.
Yeah. Well, as far as I know, they are supposed to be entitled to all the evidence, anything that the state has, it's supposed to be disclosed to the other side, especially anything that might potentially be exculpatory. So, so that's a reason why perhaps the trial is going to get pushed off, who knows when, later next year, because there is just way too much information and evidence that his attorneys are going to have to dig through. And they also have the right to take depositions. So that could all take a lot more time.
John, how do you even begin to cull through all that? I mean, not to mention the fact that Charlie's sitting in solitary in jail, and already Daniel Rashbaum, his defense attorney, said it's hard to get information to him and from him because of the jail system. But how do you, as a defense attorney, even begin to deal with that mountain of material?
I mean, we tend to get that. I would say it depends on the case, but we get volume that's similar to that in many of our cases. And it sounds very daunting on its face. And then you start flipping through it and you realize a lot of it, once you've done this for a while, a lot of it is just patently irrelevant, and you put it to the side. That doesn't mean that you can't look at every page, which they will, but 57,000 and change sounds like a lot, but you can go through that pretty quickly. But the issue here, though, is the client is not going to be sitting with them and can't really participate in the process. So it was clear to me from day one that this thing wasn't going to go in Q1 of 23. That never seemed to be realistic. And then when you heard Rashbaum's argument at the Arthur hearing, it became more apparent that there's just no conceivable way in which this trial is going to go in the early part of 2023. It's not a good development for those of us who are addicted and obsessed with the case because we want to see a third trial. But I just don't see a realistic way that is going to take place on the timetable that they initially thought it would.
Somewhere through my travels, I heard or read or saw that the first Katie McVanua trial, they bombarded the jury with too much information, and that was maybe one of the jury got saturated with information. So maybe that was the reason that was a mistrial. And allegedly the second time, they kind of streamlined it or reduced. And I am thinking, you know how the people say too much information when you start to say something that's private and so forth. So there may be even a case if you present a jury with too much information that you kind of lose your case.
John, does Karm bring up a point? Can you present too much evidence? And by the way, a viewer wrote in that my posture is horrible, and if I don't straighten it, it's just going to get worse with age. I thought that wasn't you, was it, Karm?
No, but I was thinking.
My back is hurting, so I decided to sit up straight. John, can you present too much evidence?
Yes, I think you can, and I think you tend to lose the jury that way. I thought they put on a much tighter case in the second trial. The one thing that's interesting is, and Rashbaum obviously quoted Georgia Kappelman from your podcast, and so they're watching, right? And Georgia Kappelman was clearly watching Mentor Lawyers podcast because he had one of the jurors who was one of the hung jurors from the first trial on his show. He interviewed her, and that juror said that, I didn't like some of the things that Georgia Kappelman was saying about Katie McVanua's, dalliance as a cocktail waitress. I thought it was either misogynistic or sexist. She made comments that she thought that seemed to signal that Georgia was being offensive towards Katie. And in the second trial, Georgia had removed all of those comments about Katie. She stopped some of the verbiage she was using from the first trial. So Georgia, was probably watching that show. So it's interesting. She picked up on a lot of things that the jurors, or the one juror in that other case, seemed to find that was difficult for her to sway a guilty verdict.
Well, it's interesting. In 2022, you've got a lot more weapons to go with. That's probably a bad expression, but a lot more tools in the toolbox with social media, podcasts. There's so much more information out there. Judy, not to put you on the spot, but I will. I mean, I've asked you this before, and John, I'm going to ask you as well. But in terms of a defense for Charlie, with some of the new information that's come out, any guess on what the defense might be to try to get him out of this major problem he's in right now?
Yeah. Well, maybe the attorney won't have Charlie testify, and then ultimately the attorney's job is to just poke holes in the prosecution's case and just muddy the waters and make people think, well, this could have meant something else, or, it could have been somebody else. Maybe it was Wendy cooking it up. Who knows? But we often talk about the Casey Anthony case and how surprising it was that person got off of allegedly killing her own daughter. And I remember the defense attorney seemed horrible at first. He was just making all these foolish arguments and then bringing up some crazy story about how the defendant had been molested as a kid. So in his closing argument, he kept referencing crude sexual acts that allegedly happened between his client and her father. But it swayed the jury. It made them start thinking about other things and totally distracted the jury. And ultimately, she got off. So maybe that could happen.
Yeah, Vinnie Politan brought up that very case earlier and said, look, he got out of the prediction game in terms of convictions because of that case. He's, the whole world thought Casey Anthony was guilty, except the 12 jurors in that box. But John, any more thoughts on a possible defense for Charlie?
I do. I mean, I think that Rashbaum's a smart guy, and I think that, if you compare Katie to Charlie, which one is more sympathetic? It's obviously Katie. She has 2 small children. By all accounts, she was a good mother, had no prior history with the law, and didn't have any motive. It was obviously the Adelson family that had the motive, yet they convicted her. And they did it by unanimous in the first one, and they almost had a unanimous one. In the second one, they almost had a unanimous one in the first one. So Charlie's lawyer has to look at that, and then look at the Dolce Vita tape, look at the wiretaps between Charlie and Donna, look at the motive and the implausibility as to why 2 individuals from South Florida would drive up to Tallahassee and execute a person they never knew. And he's going to understand that's a real problem for him. So what I think he's going to go with, and I thought this since day one, and again, I'll preface this by saying, I do not believe this is what occurred. I do not believe this is a defense that is going to exonerate him. But I think the best defense he has is to say, yes, I was involved. I sent these guys up to South Florida, from South Florida to Tallahassee through Katie. And the object was to intimidate Dan Markel and to tell him that if you don't start capitulating to Wendy's desire to relocate, then things may exacerbate the next time. So he's going to say that I did that. And then these guys just went rogue, and you can't believe them. Why would you ever believe them? One guy's Aladdin Kings member and so-and-so. So yes, I was involved in on Dolce Vita. I was talking about my involvement, but the involvement was never to induce a murder. It was to intimidate Dan Markel in the hopes of getting him to acquiesce to relocation. Do I think that that is a plausible defense? No. Do I think it's a successful defense? No. But I think he's got to go with something. He being Rashbaum, he can't just rely on witness credibility. He just can't do it. There's too much against Charlie in the way of both direct and circumstantial evidence.
Hey, John, what part of a trial and the law in general is the evidence, the legal side, and what part is psychological, the psychology of how an attorney plays the jury?
It's a great question. I think Georgia Kappelman and Sarah Dugan almost gave you the answer to that in the second trial. If you remember the opening statement from Sarah Dugan in trial number 2, she talked about the 2 roads. There was the evidentiary road, the Prius, the cell phone tower dumps, the rental car agreement, all that was evidence. And then the second road was the Adelson road, the motive. That's not evidence per se. That's more understanding the why. The Prius and so forth is the what and the how. But the desire to relocate Wendy, the desire for Donna to have her daughter and her 2 grandchildren back, that was the why of the murder. And Sarah Dugan talked about those 2 roads and how they eventually juxtaposed and pointed towards Katie Magbanua as the middle person.
Interesting. So I've got a bug flying around me here. So real quickly, again, extreme punishment. We've got Steve Epstein coming up next week. I just wanted to go through a couple of excerpts and get your reaction. I know John is doing yeoman's work today in spite of having COVID, so we're going to wrap it soon. But here's a excerpt from the memorial service, and it reads as follows. When the service ended, one of the first people to offer Ruth her condolences was Donna Adelson, exuding what appeared to be warmth and empathy, tears streaming down her face, streaming down Donna's face. "I'm so sorry," she said, one grandmother to another. "I promise you they," meaning the kids, "will always have those roots." And then the very next day, the Adelsons disappeared to South Florida, never to be seen again. Karm, let me start with you. You hear that. What goes through your mind? Basically, this false empathy towards a grieving mother.
I can never say I have no thoughts. One of the first associations to this is when she wrote an email, Donna wrote an email to Wendy, and he said, "You are the best actress. Use your skills."
And so Donna was acting.
Well, I don't know. In that moment, she might have really felt badly at that moment, thinking suddenly it could have been her, that her child died.
I mean, what do you make of the fact that she was sobbing, according to this Epstein book? That Donna was tears flowing down her face.
I would ask Epstein, how does he know?
That's interesting. We can ask him that. But do you think, Karm, you think psychologically there was a bit of terror running through Donna at that point, that maybe now she would be caught, and that was the real reason for these tears?
Or she might have even experienced some remorse for a minute.
Interesting. John, your thoughts on that passage?
That passage was interesting to me, and everything that occurred at the memorial service was interesting. And Ruth Markel in the unveiling had a very similar recollection. It gelled very consistently with what Steve Epstein wrote in his book. And I think that was Donna acting. Donna is a very, in my opinion, ill person to do what she did and to do what she did collaboratively with the family. For her to have some fake tears and to her to kind of feign, empathy towards Ruth was not out of character for her, not aberrational. Did she have any genuine sadness about what she had done or any remorse? Who knows? But I don't think at that time she did. I think she was in acting mode at that time. They all were. And Ruth goes into some more detail, as I alluded to earlier, about what happened at the Shiva at Wendy's house, where there was just such a strange chill in the air, where Ruth felt almost like an outsider, and she just couldn't get close to Wendy to even have a conversation without Harvey hovering by. So I think that the Adelsons may have attempted to feign empathy and to try to go through the paces of commiserating, but at the same time, they were already in defensive mode. They were concerned. They didn't want Wendy to, I don't know if they thought Wendy maybe would crack, or Wendy may have been the weak one, or Wendy may have had a moment of weakness or something, but they clearly didn't want Wendy and Ruth to be engaged in any dialogue at that point.
Judy, let me ask you a question. Are both the defense and the state reading Extreme Punishment and Ruth Markel's book? And if there's something in there that catches their eye, is there the possibility that they could depose either one of them and then enter whatever it is into evidence? How does that work?
You mean taking depositions of Ruth as well as Steve Epstein?
Yeah.
No.
Potentially. No, wouldn't happen?
Well, yeah, I think that would be kind of unlikely, but but Ruth definitely, could potentially be called as a witness. So I'm just totally guessing, but I thought maybe that was why she didn't really talk too much about Charlie Adelson and her dealings with him and her thoughts about Charlie. So, I think that would be very unusual for the attorneys to want to depose someone that was an author of a book about the case. But I can totally bet that they would all be reading these books, though, especially John Lauro.
John, your thoughts? John Singer?
I agree. I think that they're absorbing and ingesting whatever they can. As you know, Rashbaum was quick to point out George's remarks on your podcast, and I think they're going to mine whatever they can for information. I don't think they're going to depose Ruth or Steve Epstein, though. I don't think the judge would allow that because, again, neither of them have any firsthand knowledge of anything that occurred here. So it would just be conjecture on their part.
Interesting. Okay, that makes perfect sense. Two more quick excerpts and then we'll wrap it up, I promise. So this is Jeffrey Lacoste, Wendy's ex-boyfriend, as he's being interrogated post-murder around 2014. And here's the excerpt. Though he was pretty certain Wendy didn't pull the trigger or anything like that, he was starting to feel creeped out now that he was out from under her spell. Could she have been an accessory, he wondered, It makes a lot of sense to me at a certain point. When you see behind the curtain, she's a total train wreck. My psychologist would say, man, she just meets the checklist of the narcissistic sociopath, going down the list. I'm pretty heartbroken over all this, he added. That was Jeffrey Lacoste. Karm, to you first as a psychologist. So Lacoste says he was under the spell. He comes out from under the spell and then says maybe she was an accessory. She is a narcissistic sociopath. Do you think he was coming to terms with that in that moment?
He was not a well-matched person to him.
To her.
He was not a well-matched person. She was a Miami international type of a person.
Wendy would have been much better matched to me.
No,
than Jeff
she would
Lacoste.
have done things around your,
Like wrap me around her finger. It would have been the other. Karm, you know this by now. All the women get wrapped around my finger. It's the other way around.
Yeah, sure,
Karm.
sure. Nice fantasy.
Judy, you hear about that. He's under this spell of a woman. He says he comes out and he sees this narcissistic, sociopathic side of her. I don't know if you read this yet, but what was your take on that?
Oh, yes. I actually read the whole entire interrogation transcripts, and it was just totally shocking because it's even worse than we thought. It's just like after reading Ruth Markel's book, you feel that poor Jeffrey Lacoste was extremely manipulated by Wendy, and it seemed like she really was setting him up to take the fall or at least be a potential suspect to the murder. And you just can't help but feel sorry for this poor guy who got played. And he also mentioned that throughout their relationship, he sort of had an inkling that she was cheating on him. And then finally he confronted her and she was just, telling all sorts of weird stories that didn't even make sense, and first admitting that she did cheat on him, but then later saying she didn't do any of it. So anyway, yeah, the poor guy, but he definitely has a lot of insider information about what a manipulative and strange, deceitful person Wendy is.
What's interesting, he was a PhD in social work. Okay, so some psychology gets into that equation there, and she conned him even with that experience of his life and of that knowledge. She really he was literally, not symbolically, literally washing the floors in her new rented house for her. Took care of her children. I wouldn't be surprised if she left the children with him while she went out on a date.
Yeah, that's what he suspected.
If you looked at his interrogation, the first one was, I think, on July 21st of 14, 3 days after the murder. He was very skittish and very hesitant to besmirch Wendy in any way. And then when he was interrogated again in 15, he seemed to have been extricated from her spell and was much more forthcoming with details. And just look at his testimony from trial 1 to trial 2. In trial 2, he was way more aggressive towards Wendy, said that Wendy told lies on top of lies. And I think for Jeff Lacoste, it was a process. It was really a process to get over Wendy. And to pick up on what Karm said, the worst mismatch in the history. I mean, not in the history, but a terrible mismatch. I don't know how those two ever got together, but who knows?
Yeah.
No, but I think they got together. This is my theory. You want to hear it? Yes.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
My theory is that after she was going through the divorce proceedings, and she was getting this very harsh and very hard response from Dan, and here was this sweet little guy, who couldn't kill a fly.
Who she could frame, potentially.
Yeah, good. I like that. I'll buy that.
Okay.
On to the last excerpt, and then we'll wrap it up. And this is for you, Karm, because it has to do with Harvey, who you've been focused on from day one. Harvey's comfort zone was on, again, this is from Extreme Punishment, Steve Epstein's book. Harvey's comfort zone was on the passive end of the continuum, sometimes remaining on the periphery to avoid conflict. Donna's personality was more domineering. 5 of her words to every one of her husbands. Man, this sounds like you and my dad. Yet she could also be very warm and engaging. Her bond with each of her children bone deep. She was fiercely protective of them, a quintessential mama bear. Anyone daring enough to utter an unkind word about one of her offspring, deserved or not, was certain to suffer her wrath. Karm, that could be about you.
But we went over this already. I already completely assumed responsibility.
But that is what intrigues me so much. John, what is the line? You got the Waldman clan over here, but what is that line that caused the Adelsons to cross it?
I told you, we are neurotic. We are not psychotic.
John, does Carmela make sense?
To cross the line into murder, you mean?
Yeah.
I think that Donna just couldn't wrap her arms around the fact that they'd have to drive 8 hours every other to see Wendy and the boys for the next. I think the little one was, 4 at the time. So that means another 14 years. So she'd be spending the next 14 years up in Tallahassee. And I think that to her, it was anathema to her. She was not going to take that line down. The one thing about Harvey I want to add is if you listen to these wiretaps that Fancy Fiction's been doing such an amazing job with and feeding her, feeding the obsession that we all have. When you listen to Harvey and Charlie talk about some of the insider trading and some of the penny stocks they were dabbling in, it started to change my opinion a bit of Harvey. It wasn't just Matsuri, but Harvey is very complicit in some of the legal stock trades with Charlie. It's really prima facie insider trading where Charlie's telling him, I've got news, the stock's going to move to $1.35 from 90 cents. Harvey's doing the math in his head, saying he's going to double down. Should he buy it in his IRA or his personal account? Harvey seems to, not shy away from illicit activities either. So it's been an evolution with Harvey I've had, and kudos to Karm for being on the Harvey train from the very beginning.
The apple does not fall far from the proverbial tree. Judy, any final thoughts?
Can we ask John very quickly for any insider information he may have? Because he mentioned that he's friends with people who knew Dan or might have known Wendy.
Yes, yeah. The one thing that I've gleaned from several people is, Wendy is still living, I wouldn't say she's living her best life, but Wendy is still going about her business as if she doesn't have a care in the world. So has she been ostracized by certain fragments of Miami society? Sure. But when people observe her in public or even in private, they say that Wendy goes about her business as if there's nothing hanging over her head, which I think also dovetails into this notion of sociopathy, because if it were any of us, I don't know to the extent we hadn't already, I don't know what we would have done, but we certainly wouldn't be out in public flaunting ourselves. We'd be hiding under the covers, worried about the next knock on the door. But from what I've been able to glean, Wendy is living her life. And when she said in 2019 at the first Magmanua Garcia trial that the state's not going to arrest her, she really believes that. So crazy to me.
Interesting. Very interesting.
We wanted to have a book signing arranged, and we couldn't because there was a conflict.
But we'll get into that another time. We were trying to organize some stuff for Ruth to come down here to do a signing for the unveiling, and Wendy
don't mention the location.
And Wendy has a presence here, as John just alluded to, in South Florida, in Miami specifically, and there were some conflicts at play as a result. So some people didn't want to step on Adelson's toes. So that's a story for another time. Carmela is batting 1,000, I should say, for extending. Interrupting too, but extending when we're wrapping with a whole different ball game, Karm. But we'll get into that another time. John, did you have a final thought that you wanted to offer up?
No, just kudos to all of you for keeping this alive and for feeding all of our obsessions and for keeping this in the news and so forth. There's going to be a little bit of time, I think, till the next trial. Maybe there'll be some news in the interim, but keep doing what you're doing. You guys are doing an amazing job.
John, feel better.
And I was going to say, feel better and don't do anything. Rest.
Just rest. She doesn't want you working, John. Don't worry. He told me he's watching Netflix docs. Don't worry.
Okay.
Don't worry. And Judy, it was a pleasure having you. Asian American Legal Focus is Judy's YouTube channel. She does great work. Follow her there. Follow us on Instagram. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on YouTube. Follow us everywhere. Love you, America.